There I stood at the edge of my own field. Observe Ying as Jennifer's du lot 220,000 wedding tint billowed gently in the breeze, resembling some majestic pavwai lion. Loud music filled the air, while guests in high heels trampled my soybean sprouts. Her caterer even had the audacity to request that I relocate my tractor, claiming it disrupted the ambience. That was the moment I calmly bent down, flipped the switch, and the manure spreaders roared to life. Chaos erupted like a tempest unleashed. How had it come to this? Let us step back 4 days. I was simply tending to my own affairs, working the land my grandfather had toiled to preserve for our family. My field borders the upscale Pine Hollow development, an affluent neighborhood that emerged 6 years ago. Developers apparently decided farmland looked better when framed by extravagant windows. They introduced electric vehicle chargers, pet spas, and a homeowners association that equates rural charm with a poodle in a sweater. Initially, I paid them little mind, assuming they would remain on their side of the boundary, and I on mine. That was before Jennifer arrived. Jennifer, the reigning authority of the HOA and self-proclaimed guardian of suburban tranquility, swept in 2 years ago with a clipboard and a purpose. It began with minor grievances. She asked if I could refrain from starting my tractor before 9 a.m. because her husband was meditating. Then came landscaping suggestions. Wouldn't a modern VYNYL fence be preferable to my weathered wooden posts? The final straw was a letter requesting I reconsider my manure piles, as the scent of honest agriculture offended Pine Hollow's refined sensibilities. I am not one for confrontation. I was raised to address disputes with patience and clear boundaries. Thus, I declined each proposal with a courteous smile that conveyed both politeness and resolve. I assumed that would conclude the matter. Jennifer, however, interpreted refusal as an invitation to press harder. A week before the manure incident, I received an HOA newsletter sent to me despite my non-membership, a supposed gesture of goodwill. I typically discarded them, but this one caught my attention. Bold text proclaimed exciting news. The Carter wedding would occur in Pine Hollow, boasting a stunning view of the adjacent open land. A small sketch accompanied the announcement. It took a moment to register, but I realized that open land was my southern field. I paused, hoping they merely intended to admire the view. I chose not to assume the worst. Then Thursday arrived. Returning from the feed store, I pulled into my driveway and saw it, an enormous white tent, as tall as a barn and twice as wide, erected squarely in the middle of my soybean field as if it belonged there. Workers swarmed the site, driving stakes into the soil, laying plastic flooring, and stringing lights, crafting a dream wedding scene. Jennifer stood at the center, directing the operation like an overzealous event coordinator. I parked my truck, stepped out, and struggled to keep my composure. "What is this?" I inquired, already suspecting the answer but needing confirmation. She turned, beaming as if she were granting me a favor. "Oh, hello. Isn't it lovely? Don't worry, it's only for a day." I gazed past her at the tire tracks scarring my seedlings. "You're on my land." She dismissed my statement with a wave. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just the edge, and it's not like you're using it this weekend." I stared, letting her words settle. "This is private farmland." "Did you ask? Did you verify the property lines?" "We cleared it with the HOA," she replied, as if that held any authority over me. "Jennifer," I said evenly, "you and your HOA have as much control over this field as my dog does over the sky. You're trespassing." Her smile faded, and she crossed her arms. "Well, if you insist on being difficult, we can discuss this with lawyers." I nodded, inhaling deeply. "Go ahead. But if that tent remains here this weekend, I'll work this field as I always do." "You wouldn't dare," she snapped. "Oh, I would," I replied. She whirled away, muttering about rude farmers and ungrateful neighbors, and resumed ordering the caterers, who appeared utterly miserable. I stood there, gazing at my own field, feeling like an outsider. The trespassing was not the worst of it, nor was the crop damage. It was the assumption I would yield, that I was too timid to resist a legal threat. Jennifer had merely crushed my soybeans. She had trampled my dignity. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a drink, retrieving every land document in my possession. I marked boundaries, made copies, and printed satellite images with overlays. The next morning, I contacted my friend Deputy Mark, now a sheriff's deputy, and we surveyed the field together, documenting everything. I then sent Jennifer and the HOA a formal trespass notice with an invoice for crop damage. Predictably, there was no response. Why duels like her consider paperwork optional until it bears a judge's signature. By Friday, the tent remained, adorned with additional decorations, including chandeliers, as if elegant lighting could transform soybeans into a ballroom. My tractor stood prepared, oil changed, manure tanks full, my patience exhausted. I spent the day readying equipment, sharpening mower blades, topping off spreaders, checking hydraulics, and cleaning the cab windows. If I was to make a statement, I would see it clearly. That night, as the sun set, I glimpsed Jennifer in the distance, rehearsing with her daughter, both laughing, enjoying their perfect day. She didn't spare me a glance, showing no concern. That was when I knew this weekend wasn't just about farming, it was about ensuring Pine Hollow remembered where my land began. Just as I turned to head inside, a white SUV arrived near the tent. A man in a poorly fitted suit emerged, clipboard in hand, inspecting the area with an air of suspicion. I didn't recognize him, but his presence unsettled me. This was no longer merely a wedding. He claimed to be a wedding planner, though I had my doubts. From my porch, I watched him pace the field with Jennifer, gesturing at the tent as if crafting a grand scheme. He even wielded a measuring tape, feigning expertise, while she pointed toward my barn. That was the first misstep. The second came when another SUV and a catering van arrived before I'd finished my coffee, unloading tables and chairs near my tractor shed. I approached calmly. A young caterer, perhaps in his 20s and clearly unprepared for the situation, greeted me cheerfully as he carried chairs. I nodded. "Where are you placing those?" He indicated a spot near my irrigation trench. "Just over there, sir." "The bride wants a rustic cocktail area." Then Jennifer appeared, already bristling. "What are you doing?" she demanded, as if I were the intruder. "What am I doing?" I replied. "I'm observing how many laws you're breaking today." She scoffed. "Oh, please. It's not as if we're constructing a tower. It's one event, one day. Don't be so theatrical. You've erected a full wedding setup on my field and turned my barn into your kitchen," I countered. "That's not one day, that's a legal violation." Her smile vanished. "Look," she hissed, lowering her voice, "you won't win. Guests arrive tomorrow. Cause a scene, and you'll be the neighbor no one wants." "That might hold true," I said, "if this were a petty dispute. But it's trespassing, property damage, and unauthorized use of farmland." She rolled her eyes. "This is why we tried to include you in the HOA. And this," I replied, stepping closer, "is why I never joined." I walked away before she could continue her tirade. I had preparations to make. The next few hours were spent gathering EV-wide denke, deed copies, boundary markers, signs reading private farmland do not enter. I fine-tuned the manure spreaders for emphasis. Jennifer wanted rustic, and she would have it. At midday, I called my cousin Daniel, a lawyer who enjoys a good retribution story and owes me favors. I recounted the situation, and he laughed before I finished. "Got photos?" he asked. "Plenty," I replied. "Barn cameras recorded everything." "I'll be there tomorrow," he said. "Bring beer." That day felt like witnessing a disaster unfold gradually. Florists, decorators, photographers, and even a DJ requested I move my combine because it clashed with the atmosphere descended upon the field. I told him it was the only authentic element present. He didn't laugh. By evening, I stood at the field's edge, watching lights glimmer beneath the tent. Guests laughed, sipped drinks, and rehearsed toasts. Jennifer's daughter, the bride, glided through in a white sundress, radiant with happiness. For a fleeting moment, I questioned whether I was overreacting. Then I recalled the ruined crops, the barn converted into a prep station, the threats, and Jennifer's dismissal of me as insignificant. My doubts dissipated. I slept in the shed that night not out of necessity, but mistrust. Sure enough, around midnight, I caught two teenagers, likely the bride's relatives, sneaking around with fireworks. I activated the barn lights, and they froze. "You have 10 seconds before I call the sheriff," I warned. They fled before I began counting. Saturday dawned hot and humid, ideal conditions for my plan. By 7 a.m., Jennifer's team was bustling, arranging pastries and polishing glassware. Daniel arrived with coffee in one hand and a camera in the other, eager to witness the event. "Oh, I'm ready," he grinned. We positioned cameras, checked angles, and waited. At noon, guests arrived in luxury vehicles: BMWs, Range Rovers, a limousine stepping out in pastel attire, oblivious to the impending spectacle. Jennifer approached, dressed as the mother of the bride, her tone falsely sweet. "I assume you won't cause trouble today?" I smiled. "Jennifer, I'm simply working my field," as I warned. I climbed into the tractor and waited. The moment arrived as the string quartet played and the bride proceeded down the aisle, sunlight glinting off her gown, everyone standing in admiration. I activated the switch. The manure spreaders roared to life, fans whirring, sprayers spinning, launching a thick mist of fertilizer into the air like a judgment. Screams genuine, piercing screams echoed across the field. Guests scattered, dresses lifted, heels sinking into mud, hands covering noses as they raced for their cars. Jennifer stood motionless, mouth agape, watching her VY shown crumble. The bride transformed into a scene from a horror film, mascara streaming, bouquet hurled like a weapon, shouting at anyone nearby. Daniel sipped his coffee by the barn, grinning as if at a film premiere. Then a sheriff's cruiser arrived. Deputy Harris, an old-school friend, stepped out, VY Sibley perplexed. To his left, chaos reigned, guests coated in filth, chairs overturned, heels mired in dirt. To his right, I waved from my tractor as if tending the lawn. He didn't ask questions immediately, merely observed, breathing through his mouth. Jennifer charged him, dragging her mud-streaked bride, fury blazing. I caught fragments of her tirade, biohazards, assaults, a monster ruining her daughter's life. Harris glanced at me. I raised an eyebrow. He'd mediated enough disputes to know there was another perspective. When she paused, he lifted a hand. "Ma'am, step back and breathe before you faint." "Are you arresting him?" she demanded, pointing at me. "I'll speak with him," Harris replied. She stormed off, vowing it wasn't over. Harris approached as I shut down the tractor and dismounted. Daniel joined, clipboard in hand. Harris sighed the dripping spreader, then me. "Care to explain?" I shrugged. "I was working my field. Warn them. Filed a trespass notice. Got photos, VY Deo GPS. Want the VY Denke?" Daniel handed it over. Harris reviewed it, nodding. "No permission?" "None," I confirmed. "Didn't ask until it was already set up." He sighed. "They established this without consent, damaged crops, used the barn, blocked access?" "Yes," I said. "Even tried to move my combine." He rubbed his nose. "All right, we've got trespassing and property damage. Loss estimate?" "Working on it," I replied. "Overdue law 10,000. Behind us, the bride wailed about her gown. The DJ hauled equipment while retching, and caterers fled in stained uniforms. Harris glanced back, then at me. "You've made my week." "Just doing my part," I said dryly. Jennifer returned, towing a man in a bow tie who looked wretched. "This is my lawyer," she announced. He began to speak, but she interrupted. "We'll sue him for everything emotional warfare." Harris raised a hand. "Ma'am, from what I see, you trespassed after warnings. Pursue charges if you wish, but his counterclaim appears stronger." The lawyer blinked at her. "You didn't get permission?" She brushed it off. "It's a field." Daniel laughed. "Tell that to the soybeans." Jennifer glared, realizing her narrative was unraveling. Her perfect wedding, her daughter's moment, her fantasy all buried in muck and repercussions. She stomped off, mud flinging from her heels like a child's outburst. Guests departed, some scowling at me as if I'd wronged them. One man threatened legal action from his firm, slipping in manure mid-sentence. A bridesmaid attempted my irrigation hose, then shrieked when it sprayed fertilizer. I nearly felt pit nearly. By the time the last car left, the tent drooped, half collapsed, the field a mess but mine once more. Jennifer had vanished, likely blaming others. Daniel and I documented the damage photos, measurements, images of the tent's ruin. He grinned. "This will be a case study for my law students." "Happy to assist," I replied, draining the spreaders. We sat on my truck's tailgate, beers in hand, watching the sunset over the wreckage. The strainees not because I'd triumphed yet, but because I'd reclaimed what was mine. I'd shown Jennifer that wealth doesn't buy everything. The next day, Harris called the trespass report was filed, case closed. Jennifer was reportedly hiring a PR firm to reframe the story. Good luck with that. The HOA sent a letter proposing a quiet settlement too late. Daniel's editor friend posted the footage online, titled HOA Jennifer vs. The Farmer, a foul reckoning. It garnered millions of VYUs that afternoon. I received a thick envelope from the bride and groom, suing for emotional trauma and lost sponsorships. I chuckled they still didn't grasp it. This was a lesson, and the manure was merely the beginning. 3 days later, after the tent was removed and hazmat teams cleared the debris, 2 HOA board members appeared in polo shirts, looking uneasy. One held a folder, the other a clipboard. I let them linger at my gate before approaching, wiping grease from my hands. "Morning," the taller one said. "We're from Pine Hollow HOA. "Oh, good," I replied. "Cleanup crew." They shifted uncomfortably. The shorter one cleared his throat. "We're here to apologize for Mrs. Carter's actions. The board didn't authorize it. We regret the misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," I said, eyebrow raised. "Unfortunate oversight," the taller one added. I let them fidget, then extended my hand. "Got that in writing?" They handed over the folder an apology signed by the board, excluding Jennifer. An offer of partial crop compensation. A promise of no future interference if I kept the VY-DO offline. I nodded, closed the folder, and walked to the porch. They trailed me. I turned. "I appreciate it," I said. "I'll consider it. But the VY-DO." I paused. "It's VY-RAL 12 million VYUs last I checked. The news wants an interview. People enjoy seeing bullies face justice, especially with manure." They left, deflated. The saga didn't end there. Jennifer, humiliated, sent a rant to Pine Hollow residents, labeling me a saboteur. Neighbors forwarded it to me with apologies exhausted their patience long ago. My actions had broken her hold. A petition removed her as HOA president within a month. Her successor, a retired librarian named Margaret, brought me an apple pea delicious and a note. "You're the hero we didn't know we needed." Jennifer's daughter lost her influencer contracts. It's challenging to market skincare when your manure meltdown becomes a meme. I received one final desperate letter from Jennifer's lawyers, pleading for arbitration. I ignored it. With the settlement, I built a new fence not out of necessity, but for clarity. Along it, facing my field, I hung laminated stills from the VY-DO. Manure striking the tent, guests fleeing, Jennifer's stunned express I own a private gallery of triumph. I upgraded my tractor, too, naming it Jennifer in gold lettering. The point was made. Life resumed, crops grew, the barn was cleaned, Pine Hollow softened. Cookies appeared at my mailbox, notes thanked me for standing firm. Daniel suggested a book or podcast, dubbing it Spreading Justice. I told him to stick to law. It's a local legend now. Out here, land is more than soil, its roots, labor, legacy. Jennifer saw it as her stage. She learned it fights back. No more HOA letters, no inspection, just peace, earth, diesel, and EVY that justice can carry a potent scent. Jennifer's house is for sale, price reduced twice. Rumor has it she's escaping to a farm-free locale. Wise choice. This land remembers, and it's mine again, dignity intact.